Hi, I'm Doug Lynam, and I was a Marine, a monk, and a money manager. And now I'm here to help you tame your money monsters with the Enneagram. So, today, what I want to do is give you a quick Enneagram test. Now, to help you identify your personality type in the Enneagram system. And in the Enneagram, there's 9 different archetypes of personality. And I'm going to break them all down for you shortly. But first, most Enneagram tests that you can take online are at best maybe 60 to 70% accurate, and many of them are maybe worse than that. And I'm going to try to help you identify your type a little more efficiently with just 2 questions rather than giving you 50 or 100 on a questionnaire. This is going to be sort of a video chat where we're going to talk through these 2 key questions. And the first question, to answer it accurately, I'm going to need you to take a moment and get comfortable. So if you're in a place where you're going to be distracted, there's a lot of noise and things going on, maybe find a quiet spot where you can just be in a contemplative and really safe and comfortable space where we're going to explore some difficult emotional issues. And you want to be in a physical setting that you're really comfortable in. And once you've taken a moment to get settled, I want you to sit comfortably. Maybe close your eyes, put your hands on your lap. Just take a couple deep breaths and just ground yourself. And then take a few more breaths and just kind of scan your body. We're going to do a really simple meditation. It won't take long. And I want you to just notice any tension or stress, any parts of your body that are a little uncomfortable. And that's okay. Just no judgment. Just notice it. All we're trying to do is to bring your attention into the present moment, to be aware of your physical sensations, to focus on your breath. And now, with your eyes closed, take a few more breaths and just notice the thoughts in your mind. What's stressing you out? What's kind of been, all the anxieties and pressures of the day? Try to just notice them. Not going anywhere. And just treat them like clouds that come and go. You don't attach to them. And if they want to stay, they stay. There's no judgment. But just kind of notice where you're at mentally right now. And once you feel grounded, I want you to do a little visualization exercise with me. I want you to imagine your darkest emotional moments. Where do you go in your deepest pain? What is that space like for you? And really, I want you to think about it particularly from the perspective of your childhood. Maybe when you were, say, imagine 10-year-old, 12-year-old you sitting in your room alone, upset about something that was kind of a recurring theme of your childhood. Maybe it was a particular trauma. Maybe it was things that happen on a daily basis. What was the thing that upset you the most in your childhood? And I want you to just sit with that. And I want you to just explore that gently for a moment. And I want to help you name that without trying to force it, but name that pain. Because what we know in the Enneagram, and we know this from neurobiology as well, is that there's 3 core negative emotions. And they are anger, fear, and sadness. And sadness can also be perceived as shame. So if that's a useful substitution for you, go ahead with it. But in this darkest emotional space where you go when things get really rough, are you feeling more anger? Are you feeling more fear? Or are you feeling more sadness and shame? And that's going to give us, if we can answer that one question accurately, then we have a 69% chance of knowing what your Enneagram type is right off the bat. Because that's going to drop you into one of the 3 triads of the Enneagram. So there's 9 types, and we're going to break those 9 types into 3 quadrants or triads. And those are the anger, fear, and sadness triads. So which of those do you go to most often in your deepest pain? That's question one. Okay, that can be a little rough. But the second question is a little harder to determine. It's going to take a little time, and we're going to need to go through each of the 9 types a little bit carefully to determine whether you take that anger, that fear, and that sadness. Your childhood self had really one of 3 choices as an option to deal with that pain. And that's the pain that we talked about in the previous video about cutting your psychological umbilical cord. It's the thing that really allowed you to individuate as a separate human ego consciousness. It's what allowed your sense of self and sense of separation. It's what allowed you to feel separate from the world. It pushed you away into your own ego, this darkest emotional space. And it's necessary for you to have an ego to drive around in. So we're not trying to judge it, and there's no right or wrong here. And there's no good or bad Enneagram types. They're all fantastic when they're healthy, and they're all extremely destructive when they're not. But we want to help you tame your money monsters so that you can be of more use, be a tool of love and service in the world by being the most effective version of your type. And that's the journey that we're on together. But going back to this pain, you had 3 ways of dealing with it. You could either internalize it, meaning you took that anger, that fear, that sadness, and you directed it at yourself. Or you could externalize it, and you could project it out onto the world around you. That's option 2. Or option 3, you can have both. You can have kind of stereophonic fear, anger, fear, or sadness, and those are unique Enneagram types. So that's why there's 9 different personalities in the Enneagram system, because there's 3 core negative emotions that we all have access to. One of them cut your psychological umbilical cord with your caregivers more strongly than the others. And then you had 3 ways of dealing with that: internally, externally, or you could have both. So let's go around the Enneagram for a minute and explore each of those options, and maybe one of these will land more solidly with you than others. But take your time with it. There's no rush. It took me a good solid 6 months to a year to figure out my Enneagram type when I was first exposed to it. But hopefully this is going to efficiently help you avoid some of the struggles I went through, and many others as well, and the confusion around figuring out what your type is. So the first option, we're going to start with the anger triad. That's what we call types 8, 9, and 1. And we're going to start with type 8. So type 8, what they do is they took all that anger and they externalize it. They project it out onto the world around them. And that anger is their sacred wound. And that sacred wound also creates a greatest fear for each type. And the greatest fear of type 8 is being harmed and controlled. So they probably grew up in an environment where there was a lot of maybe chaos, or there was a lot of betrayal and abuse. And those betrayals left them feeling powerless. So they took all that anger that they felt at being powerless, and now they push it out against the world. And we call them the challenger of the Enneagram. That's one of their names. I call them the Hummer because they can run over any obstacle with ease. And so that's the type 8. That's the essence, nature of the challenger, is because they fear being harmed or controlled, they're always pushing out against reality around them to prevent themselves from being ever harmed or controlled again. And so, like all types in the anger triad, they're looking for control and empowerment. So pushing that anger out gives them power, and it gives them control over their environment. So that's type 8. Now we're going to jump over to type 1 for reasons that'll be obvious in a moment. Type 1s, they internalize that anger. So their psychological umbilical cord was cut by anger that they drove at themselves. And so it created their greatest fear of being bad or defective. So type 8s have this, or type 1, have this strong inner critic at themselves, always telling them to be a good boy or good girl, or be better, or do it right, do it the right way. And that's why we call them the improver, because they're always trying to improve themselves and improve the world around them. So they're very good at finding fault in themselves, first and foremost, because this anger inside them that they direct is not fun. But they're also very good at finding flaws in others and in systems. So if you, in work and business, they're great for finding flaws, systemic flaws in the world around them. So that's type 1. I call them the BMW of egos because they're precision engineered, but they do require a fair bit of maintenance. And then in the middle, between the 8 and the 1, we've got type 9. And they have a stereophonic anger. You'd never know it except in rare moments of outbursts. But type 9s, there's so much anger inside them. They felt angry at themselves internally for not being able to meet their needs as a child, which, and then they felt angry at the world around them for not really meeting them either. So the way they survived was by going along to get along. So by basically suppressing their needs and their desires, then any outcome is acceptable, because if you don't express an opinion, then how things turns out doesn't really matter to you. So they're often called the peacemaker. They don't like conflict, and one of the reasons is because that all that anger creates their greatest fear, which is a loss of wholeness. And it's like the Hulk inside them. They're afraid if they ever let that Hulk of anger out, it would just rip and smash themselves and the world around them apart. So they work really hard not to trigger that anger. And that's why I call them the RV of egos, because they always want to kind of park in the campground. Doesn't mean they don't get a lot done in life. It just means that when it comes to conflict, they tend to be pretty conflict avoidant, or they handle them very skillfully, actually, helping others navigate their conflicts. But they're very reticent to really express a strong opinion sometimes, or assert themselves to get their needs met. And so that's a quick summary of the 3 types in the anger triad. Each in their own way is gaining that empowerment or control over their environment, but in very different ways. Now, if we're going to go over to the sadness or shame triad, we've got the type 2, and type 2s, they externalize that sadness. And what that means is they feel sad about how they think the world perceives them, which is another word for shame in many ways. But it's shame is kind of processed up here in the cortex, and it's running off of the sadness circuitry, which is a much more primal emotion down here. So it can feel sadness, or shame sometimes feels more visceral to those in the sadness triad, and if that works for you, by all means substitute whenever I use the word sadness. But what that meant for the type 2, that externalized sadness, is it created a fear of being unlovable, that the people around them don't really need them or want them around. And so what that does for the type 2 is they become compulsively helpful. They're called the helper for that reason, or I call them the ambulance of ego consciousness, because they're always running around being very kind, they're very sweet, they're very generous, but they're in a kind of pay-to-play kind of game. It's a bit of a deception. They're helping you so that you will turn around and validate them and tell them that they're really a valuable, lovable person in your life, which is what they're deeply looking for. And like all types in the sadness triad, they're looking for validation and connection. So each of the 3 types in the sadness triad is a unique coping strategy to get that validation and connection that they so desperately desire. And then we're going to jump over to type 4, which is called the individualist sometimes. But they've taken that sadness and they've internalized it, meaning they feel really sad or even ashamed about how they perceive themselves. And what that creates is their greatest fear is that they don't have a unique identity. Like they don't have a place in the world. They don't know who they are. They don't feel like they fit in. They're always the odd person out. But they sort of, in order to assuage that fear, they always try to stand out and be different in everything that they do. So that, they always kind of take the road less traveled. And the problem for 4s is they hate the Enneagram initially more than almost any type, because they hate to be put into a box. Well, unfortunately, there's a box for people who hate to be put into a box, and that's type 4s. Sorry, gang. Apologies for that. But that's why I call them the custom car. So they're always trying to customize their ride so they look great going down the highway of life, standing out to be just a little bit different in everything they do. So they withdraw from conventionality. They chafe at the status quo. And then in between, we've got type 3. They both internalize that sadness, so they feel sad and ashamed about how they perceive themselves. And they also feel sad or ashamed about how they think others perceive them. And so that stereophonic sort of shame, that pool that they're swimming in, creates their greatest fear of being worthless, that they have no value in the world. So they're called the achiever, or I call them the race car. They're always striving for the next goal, the next gold star, the pat in the back from teacher's head, and crossing the finish line and getting the medal around their neck for having achieved something. And that's how they gain validation and connection, by sort of winning it, by earning it in some fundamental way. So the type 4, to put that in contrast with type 4, type 4s are withdrawing to get you to notice them and stand out and get connection, get validation for standing apart. And they're almost the opposite of type 3, where 3s are going to conform to whatever the convention around them happens to be to get your approval. And type 4s are going to reject or step apart from conventionality to sort of get their unique identity and validation and approval. And type 2s are going to sort of kind of fawn over the people around them to win that validation and connection. So that's a quick overview of the 3 types in the sadness triad. Now we'll jump over to the fear triad. Type 5s, they're the type that internalize their fear. So what that means for a 5 is they fear being incompetent. They don't trust themselves to be capable in the world. And so they strive really hard to be extremely competent at whatever they do. And so they're always sort of, we call them the investigator, or I call them the compact car for a reason I'll explain in a moment. But that investigator, they're always pulling data in. They're sort of absorbing this infinite amount of information coming at them from the world around them, which is very overwhelming. It's a very overwhelming place to be a type 5, and they're trying to sort all this data out in their minds, master it, be competent, and then speak, and then act. And so sometimes they get stuck in their head. They don't ever get around to the acting or to the speaking because they don't feel that they're fully competent at what they're doing or saying. And I call them the compact car because their social gas tank is very small. They have a very limited gas tank for social interaction because all this information coming at them from people, from their circumstances, from their environment, it wears them out pretty fast. And so they need a lot of alone time to down-regulate and just catch their breath because there's that internal fear that's gripping them so much. Now, we'll jump over to type 7s, which in a weird way are sort of the opposite of type 5s. Type 7s, they externalize their fear. So what that means is they're afraid that the universe around them, that the world isn't going to be able to meet their physical or emotional needs. They're afraid that their needs aren't going to be met. So they're always looking for more. They're very curious, they're very inquisitive, but they have this mind and this energy that's really enthusiastic, which is why we call them the enthusiast, because they're always excited about what's next, because they have a really hard time being right here and now, because their greatest fear is being in pain or privation. That fear that the external reality isn't going to meet their needs, they're trying to avoid ever feeling that pain and feeling that privation. So they're always kind of grabbing, they always want more from life. And that's why I call them the SUV of egos, because they're kind of the go anywhere, do anything, off-road adventurers of the Enneagram. But they have a very hard time being in the present moment because they always have this, what we call FOMO is the key hallmark of a 7, fear of missing out. They're always afraid that they're missing out on something. And that's a deeper dive we'll go into later. And then to round out the Enneagram, we have our type 6. And type 6, my heart goes out to these folks. I mean, every type has their own struggles, but for 6s, they have both internalized fear at themselves, about fear that they're not going to be capable or competent, and they also are afraid that the universe around them isn't capable or competent. And so sixes often had some terrible betrayal from an authority figure in their past. And so they both are skeptical of authority figures, and they're also skeptical of their own ability to protect themselves because they, as a child, some betrayal from an authority figure perhaps. And there's different ways sixes can evolve, but typically there's some sort of inability to protect themselves from that authority that they both wanted, needed, and trusted. And so we call them the skeptic because they're very skeptical. They're always looking for the exit sign in a movie theater. They're always looking, they're sort of worst case scenario thinkers par excellence. They are always on hyper-vigilant state of what could go wrong, what could. They have a great sense of humor often because they make great comedians for that reason, and they're fun to be around. But I call them the family sedan because they want every security feature possible. They want to keep things that ride very smooth, and sometimes they're often called the loyalist because. Making decisions for a six is very hard. And when they do make a decision, when they do commit to a person, a place, an ideology, a belief system, a political party, a sports team, whatever it is, they're very loyal to their team and to their friends because their decision to trust someone was very hard fought. So once they give their trust, they're very loyal to it and very reluctant to give it up. But heaven forbid you actually really do betray that trust, and you will see a ferocious side to a six come roaring out. And the greatest fear, of course, for a six is being without support or guidance. Like they're really looking for some internal guidance system they can use to navigate the world by. That could be politics or religion or whatever it is, philosophy, whatever it is that helps give them some sense of to anchor internally, but also externally. They want to be often kind of a part of a team or part of something larger than themselves to give them that sense of support or guidance that they deeply desire. So hopefully from those two questions, what's your deepest painful moments like? Is that filled with anger, fear, or sadness? And then do you direct it internally, externally, or both? And if you can answer both of those questions after the end of this video, then you have a really good sense of what your Enneagram type is. And in the next series of videos, we're going to do a deep dive into the money monsters for each of the 9 types, as well as I'll do a separate video on the ego structure of each of the types individually. And remember that the Enneagram, on its deepest level, is really a fractal, meaning it has infinite variety inside of a firm structure. And we're just playing with the top layer of the fractal here. It has so much more nuance and complexity than what we're just touching the surface of in this first video. But if you enjoyed this and found it helpful, please like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.